BIC Podcast, episode 115, Super Bowl Hangover Edition. Very exciting. We've gotten past the Super Bowl. The three-peat was thwarted. Congratulations to the Philadelphia Eagles and their fans. I feel nothing. But nonetheless, we will still talk about the game. We'll touch on that. And for those of you who are OGs and have been following the BIC channel, I may invoke the Goat of Goats. You know who it is if you've been on this a long time. And since Eric is excited about these things, it's the passion he has in life for grading, as an owner of Beckett, understandably. But we will discuss the PSA, the infamous PSA change that is scandalized the hobby and invoke feelings, a lot of feelings. We'll discuss that. So there'll be that and more on this episode of the BSC Podcast. Under the gaze of a watching eye of Brett Favre, one must always be careful when they invoke the feelings. But before we get into that, I think we shall talk a little bit of the Super Bowl. But most important thing, before I even get into the rest of it, I want to make sure we cover this and cover this well. We all got the pick right. Yeah, none of us went with the blowout, but nonetheless, we all said Philadelphia for various reasons. And it turned out it wasn't all Saquon. It was actually more of a mix of anything else. Jalen Hurts was the Super Bowl MVP, so that was the thing. And Patrick Mahomes had literally the worst possible game he could have possibly had at the worst possible time. It didn't turn out well for him. It was not a good day at the office for any of those guys. Also, not a good day at the office for Andy Reid. It was not a good look for those guys. And Travis Kelce, not so great. Nonetheless, we'll touch on that a little bit. We won't spend too much time on it because, to be honest, I did a live watch along. I literally did a live watch along with Paul. We hung out. Even the Burrell joined in for a little bit. It was not a fun game to watch. If you hated the Chiefs, it was a fun game to watch for you, I'm sure.
Hold on. Can you repeat that?
It was, if you hate the Chiefs?
No, the part before that.
It was not a fun game?
Yes, thank you. I said that weeks ago. I warned y'all. It was going to be boring. No. I'm just kidding.
It was boring because of the teams we had in there, and yeah. So it was one of those things. Like I said, going into it. The problem is, I can't follow y'all. Not everybody, but I can't follow y'all with the I hate the Chiefs. Here's the thing. I don't really have the aversion. I'm an NFC guy, so I don't really have the aversion to the Chiefs in it. It's like, and the Eagles literally do less than nothing for me. So I'm sitting there like, you winning. So you know what I will say? You prevented the three-peat. So from that perspective, congratulations to you. But I feel nothing as far as Philadelphia is concerned. So congratulations for winning. I am now willing to pretend this season didn't even happen.
I want to be completely honest about, especially with like the rant a couple weeks ago and everything, my distaste, my disinterest, my dislike of the Chiefs. It stems also because I am a Ravens fan. And there is a lot of this comparison, especially being in the AFC, of Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes. And I've always supported the fact that Mahomes has always had a lot better targets around him than Lamar Jackson has had. Even this year, Lamar had an incredible passing season, but he didn't have like Zay Flowers is his best wide receiver, and he's not an incredible wide receiver. And I actually was talking to a very passionate Chiefs fan that lives out near Kansas City today. And Sean, I don't know if he keeps up with the podcast or not, but if he does, shout out to him. He mentioned Hollywood Brown is not a number one wide receiver. And I stated that years ago when he was Lamar's number one wide receiver. So I'm glad Mahomes people are able to capture that now and see what I was talking about then. But overall, it's kind of that rival thing in a sense, even though the Steelers are the Ravens' big rival and the Chiefs aren't in our division. It's an AFC thing. And Lamar has always been, compared with Mahomes. It's also bitterness because obviously the Ravens haven't made the Super Bowl and the Chiefs continue going, and it just like you want to see someone else have some success. So it was exciting to see the Eagles beat them and beat them the way they did. I will admit though, for the longest time, I think I even stated it in the Discord, I said the game has this feeling that it's going to stay close enough, air quotes, to keep the fans interested, but the Chiefs are going to come back and pull this out in the end, because that's the way it felt for the longest time. Like, Philly was outplaying the Chiefs by a wide margin, but they weren't building that big lead. It was like they couldn't put them away of sorts, even though they were outplaying them. So the way it turned out, I was kind of shocked at that, because I did think it was going to stay close and turn into a Chiefs win at the end. But props to Philly.
Mm-hmm. Now, quickly touch on a couple of stat line items, just some interesting things to throw in there, and then Eric, feel free to throw in anything you want to. I did enjoy that both quarterbacks were the leading rushers for their respective teams. Both quarterbacks. That's not good, by the way. Generally speaking, that does not for a good game make.
Well, one of them was running plays and gaining yards on purpose. The other was running for his life.
To be fair, indeed, Patrick Mahomes averaged 6.3 yards per carry. That's not bad. That's not
he
bad.
Was really, really scared.
Yeah. The problem is, and we were talking about this before we hit the record button. The problem is he only had 4 carries, and so 6.3% average though is pretty good. Like the 6.3 average is pretty solid. Nothing wrong with that. The problem is he was the leading rusher, and four carries is not going to get the job done. Kareem Hunt had 3 carries. That isn't going to get the job done. P. Ryan, 1 carry for 8 yards. Great average,
that
but
was
it's
in
not going to get
garbage
the job.
time, I think, too.
Absolutely. But what I'm getting at here is this is not good. This is no bueno. None of this that I'm describing is very good. And Pacheco had 3 carries. So when you're talking, I think it totaled to 11 carries total for that team. Saquon actually had 25 carries, and they held him to 2.3 yard average, which actually is look, on a day when the Chiefs struggled on everything, they did manage to shut down Saquon Barkley. That was the one thing they managed. Everything else didn't work. None of the rest of it worked. And let's not act like Jalen Hurts lit him up on the scoreboard. He was 17 for 22 for 221 yards. 2 touchdowns and 1 interception. One of the touchdowns he had was a rushing touchdown. Did he earn? I was talking with Paul when we were doing the live. I said, Jalen Hurts is going to get the Super Bowl MVP, but there's no one single dominant performance outside of the defense as a whole being dominant. The Eagles defense, if you want to give the MVP to the Eagles defense, literally stomping them and like, we will control this game, I could get behind it. But if you have to pick one player, then you're lacking in choices. You didn't really have a lot of options.
I was really kind of hoping for that. I would have loved to have seen it. I think it would have been really incredible to give the MVP to the entire defensive crew, because they were just a blanket. They just blanketed, and that was it.
This is a big thing though, because you mentioned Jalen got the MVP, and obviously statistically, he had the numbers to back it. It's a voted on award.
Yeah, I'm just saying though, my point is like enough, because there wasn't any other offensive standouts at all. And I'll give him the credit for the 72 yards rushing. I'll add that on there. So that's at least something. But
my point was that I was trying to get to here. You mentioned the defense. Mm-hmm. That defense, like, they kind of helped that offense out, not only with field position and that sort of thing, but it took edge off of that offense, knowing that you don't have to go down and like score. You don't have to force the issue and score, because that defense was playing well enough that they had confidence they could go back out and stop the Chiefs. Not many teams can have that confidence. But on another point that I wanted to make, you have to credit Saquon. Yes, he ran 25 times and only had, just over 2 yards a carry. But the fact that they stayed with rushing him, even at a 2.3 yard per clip or whatever, it kept that Chiefs defense honest to allow Jalen to get those opportunities to throw the ball. He was picking 100%. Up blitzes. He was catching passes. I think he had 70 some yards receiving, I think. Somewhere in there, 60, 70 yards receiving. He was doing the things that aren't showing up in the 200 yards passing and all of that. He didn't have the 100 plus, 150 plus yard game. But when you really watched and broke down what he was doing, he opened up so much of what Jalen was allowed to do there, because without Saquon back there, that Chiefs defense would have played a whole different way, and they wouldn't have been trying to clamp down on stopping Saquon. So running him 25 times, even though it wasn't working, kept them honest. They couldn't back off because it only took one time and he would bust it through for a touchdown. So, you have to give him credit. It's not the numbers game, so people aren't going to vote on it because he didn't have the sexy statistical game, but he was a huge piece of why Jalen had the numbers he did.
You're
I agree with that.
Correct. 100% correct. I was going to say all the same stuff, so you saved me from having to say it all. So yeah, I agree 100%.
Yeah. And if you check back on last week's episode, we all picked the Eagles. Obviously, we didn't pick the blowout. But outside of, so to Brandon's point, outside of it being the standout performance, they did keep going back to Saquon, to his point.
Mhm.
And the end result was, I've got the number in front of me, was a time of possession of almost 37 minutes to 23.
Yep.
That time of possession, when the time of possession skew, the reason I like the run game in a lot of these situations is if you can use the run game, sometimes you have to keep using it even if it's not quote unquote working, because it still eats clock. So it means your drives don't end too fast. Like you don't want to, even if it's a 3 and out, I would rather you at least use a couple minutes as opposed to a 3 and out that is like you threw 3 times, 3 incompletions, and it used up like 6 seconds. Like that doesn't get anything done. That means you're off the field and the defense has to come back and they had no time to rest. Like you got nothing out of this. Not only did with a 3 and out, but you also were not effective. So at least if you can move the ball, try to run the ball a little bit, even if it doesn't get very far, just the sheer attempt of doing that gives your defense a couple of moments of breather. It gives them a chance. And if you sustain drive, get a couple of first downs and run the ball a bit, it gives the defense a chance to come in fresh. And guess what? A fresh defense can continually attack and attack and attack and attack. Well, the time of possession was very heavily controlled by the Eagles. That means that defense, every time the defense came out, they were fresh every single time and they could just attack constantly.
And to your point earlier, you mentioned Jalen's stats. You said he threw the ball 22 times.
Yep.
And the passing game was working, and they still ran Saquon more times than Jalen Hurts attempted to throw the ball.
Yeah, it was an efficient
that shows
passing
something
game.
right there.
An efficient passing game.
Yep.
Which is, that'll get the job done. But is it aesthetically pleasing though? Not from a viewer standpoint, not really.
It's not going to get the votes.
Yeah, you didn't get the big Saquon breakout run, and Jalen Hurts was just kind of moving it down the field consistently. It was a very efficient effort on their part, but I can't call it exciting. Like these are two different things. Effective, yes, absolutely effective and very dominant in that way, but not amazing. So that was kind of my takeaway from it, is that unfortunately as a game, probably if you were watching it live, you could have at least been BSing with us. Basically we found our entertainment in that, but that's the best we could do. It wasn't too great, but I thought it was very funny. One other thing I'll try to pull up here, because I did hear about it. And for the last time this season, who wants to play the Guess the QBR game one more time? You already know the answer?
I think I remembered. I think I've cheated and looked earlier. Was it 11.3?
All right, so Eric is the only one who gets to play. Eric is the only one who gets to play that.
All right.
Let's be fair about this. So QBR,
Yep.
the only advanced stat I will accept, 0 to 100, 50 being an average game.
Yep.
What was Patrick Mahomes' QBR in this Super Bowl?
14.6.
You still went too high. It's 11.4.
I actually said 11.3, but he didn't hear it.
Yeah. No bueno. But it is what it is. No surprise. It was a very poor performance. Everybody kind of agrees. He did get in some yards and a couple of touchdowns in garbage time, but that really didn't change anything.
Yeah, they had their third string guys in there at the end, so they could say they played in the Super Bowl and stuff. So it's like they switched out the quarterback and everything and had their backup quarterback in the last few plays. We can say that he played in the Super Bowl, which is great.
The Chiefs coming in throwing that deep bomb when there was no hope in hell that they could come back because they had no timeouts left. That just gave a little bit of stats to Patrick Mahomes. His QBR was probably even lower before that play.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Basically. Yeah, basically. It was just a couple of garbage time ones to make the yardage look a little better.
The big story, I think, and this is what, ESPN and all the other sports sites kind of have been talking about all day. And first I'll preference it with I hate Tom Baby. I'm just not a fan of Tom Baby in off the field in any way. But that doesn't mean that I don't respect what he did in his 20 years of playing. And he was absolutely incredible. I'm very lucky to have seen Montana play his whole career, and then I got a chance to see Brady play his whole career. So I've seen the two best of all time play their whole careers, and I'm lucky for that. But all you've been hearing about is Mahomes is the GOAT. Mahomes is better than Brady. Mahomes is gonna get 3-peat. Mahomes is gonna get 10 titles. Mahomes. That's done. All right. And I think the whole, Mahomes is the GOAT. He's better than Brady. He needs to be compared to Brady, needs to take a break. Because Brady never, ever shit the bed at the Super Bowl. Even when he lost 3, his statistics were very good. His statistics in the loss against Philadelphia, he threw for 500 plus yards in a loss with no garbage time. So this idea that Mahomes is in the same category as Tom Brady needs to take a back seat for a little while. He is nowhere near as good of a quarterback as Tom Brady is. He gets to another Super Bowl. He wins another Super Bowl. He throws for, 300 plus yards. Okay. But I don't want to hear any more about it. Now, I understand that sports, fans are one thing, and then sports reporters are another, because they're the ones that have to come up with stuff to say every day. And as minor league as we are, we have to come up with stuff to say on our shows, right? It's easy.
Hey, settle down. This is GOAT level shit right now.
Settle down. Level. So I understand that if you're on ESPN every single morning on Get Up or whatever the hell other shows they have, they had to come up with something at 5 days a week. So comparing Mahomes to Brady is easy, and they can talk about it and go back and forth and debate it and use statistics, and it kills time for the show, and the fans get behind it, either love it or hate it. I don't want to hear about it anymore. I watched this guy play for 20 years, every single game for 20 years. Did he have bad games? Yeah, he had a few. Did he make mistakes? Yeah. Like the time that he dropped that ball, that easy pass, because he has no athletic ability at all. He is the worst athlete in NFL history, but still somehow the greatest quarterback. And so there's plenty of things you can say that he wasn't perfect at, but he never showed up to a Super Bowl and just totally shit the bed. And Mahomes never had a moment that he looked calm, cool, collected, and in the zone. He looked as if someone threw me out there and I was just trying to not die.
But
that's not what greatness looks like.
To tie in cards, and we can talk about the Brady Mahomes comparison there. But there was something that stood out to me that I think people in the hobby should actually take note of, because we've always heard the statement, defense wins championships. That's been said for years and years and years. But yet it's always tied back to the GOAT of football being the quarterback of whoever, right? Montana, Brady, now you're mentioning the Mahomes thing. The Eagles yesterday, and in that game, if you want to take one thing away from it, that was not Yes, he got the MVP trophy. Yes, and we just talked about this. He had the stats, he got the votes, whatever. But that game was a full team performance. That defense showed that I don't give a damn how elite of a quarterback you are. People can say that Mahomes is the GOAT, he's the current GOAT, whatever. And that defense made him look silly in the biggest game, even with garbage time statistics, having an 11.3 QBR. That wasn't necessarily just because there were some dropped passes, because he still had Travis Kelce out there. That was that defense was playing their ass off. And then
That
on the
was
flip
awesome.
side of the ball, you had, like I said, Saquon didn't have the stats, but he did the little things that aren't going to show up on the stat sheet. You know, you had AJ Brown make, some catches, Devontae Smith. You had guys out there that were playing their ass off on the offensive side as well. So I think it needs to be noted. And I think, what's his name, Nick Sirianni, the coach, he said it like at the post game, football is the biggest team sport, and they put together a full team performance. And it showed. I don't give a damn who you are or how great people want to crown you at quarterback. A great team that played together can stop your ass. And that's what the Eagles did.
They were awesome.
Fair
They were
points.
awesome.
Fair points.
But I just don't want to hear the comparison for a while. I don't want to hear the comparison for at least 2 more years, and let's see what this kid does in the next 2 years. And he wins another Super Bowl. He wins a league MVP. He just has unbelievable statistics, does some crazy things on the field. In 2 years, maybe I can start hearing whispers again. But
he wasn't even a Pro Bowler this year.
I don't want to hear it
from the Pro Bowl.
I just don't
Tough times.
I don't want to hear him being compared to Brady for at least 2 years.
I think it's interesting that Eric takes this tact because I in the sake of scholarship, I do feel it's appropriate that I remind people because we always look at the end conclusion. The funny thing is whenever we do this comparison, because it is fun to do the whole GOAT thing, the whole conversation, every generation wants its player to be the GOAT. The only reason there were any whispers of it is because they were going to another Super Bowl. They've done 7 straight AFC championships, and they had at least the opportunity. In the end, the Philadelphia was able to go out there and do their job. They got it done. And Philadelphia wasn't like Philadelphia wasn't a good team all season. They were playing extremely well the whole season. They put up a great record in it, and they got through, and they managed to demonstrate the last 2 games. They put up, I think it was 55 on Washington and then 40 in the Super Bowl. So 95 points in the last 2 games. Very impressive. But, Eric was saying, Tom Brady never shit the bed in the Super Bowl. Interesting. I can see here a stat line of 16 for 27, 145 yards and 1 touchdown. Now, here's a fun game, Eric. 6 Super Bowls that they won in New England, and they lost 3. Which one of the 9 Super Bowls did he go 16 for 27 for 145 yards? Was it a win or a loss?
I would say it's a win.
That was the first one. That was where his job was to carry the ball and hand it off. The first 3 Super Bowls, for the most part, he was a game manager. People forget that there's 2 distinct parts to Tom Brady's career. You can split the part in 2. There's the part where he won 3 championships early on, and he was not the star. He was a guy whose job was to get the job.
Is that when they had Curtis Martin?
No, by that point, Curtis Martin was out. The leading rusher on that one was, I had it here, Antoine Smith. For that game. 18 attempts for 92 yards. That's my point. Remember, that was the first one. That was where they played the Rams, the greatest show on turf. Kurt Warner on the other side of that was 28 for 44 with 365 yards.
Right.
He put up a great performance, but he also threw 2 interceptions. So they made mistakes. And remember, this is the Adam Vinatieri, game-winning field goal. So this is the story of the early Patriots was enough to get the job done. So he wasn't the star. He wasn't expected to carry anything because that wasn't his job. It was literally
the year they wanted
team defense.
To go because the Raiders should have went The tuck
Yeah, that was
rule.
after the snow, the tuck rule game. Yeah. Which you need a little bit of luck, a little bit of luck. So Tom Brady has been the beneficiary of the odd call in his career. So anyway, bottom line, the first portion of his career, the first 3 Super Bowls was the game manager era, because that was 3 and 4 years. So that was right at the beginning of his career. Then he didn't win a Super Bowl for 10 years. So even Tom Brady through 14 years has no business being called the GOAT. Through 14 years had no business.
1 year, I get your point. I just want to say 1 year he got his knee blown out in the first game and didn't play the whole season.
Yeah. And then they changed rules and they wussified the NFL.
Yeah.
If he dies, he dies.
Yeah.
And if they had allowed that, the second half of his career doesn't happen because someone murders him.
Yeah.
So all I'm saying is old man Brady ain't running away from anybody if the rules say you can't murder him. Yeah. So he benefited from that. Let's be real. And if Marshawn had run the ball, I'm just saying, he could have killed it right there, dead where it stood. He didn't run the ball. Dunkachino reminds us. Thank you, Dunkachino. So all I'm getting at is that it takes a little bit of luck. The point is that you require some good breaks along the way to goatdom.
And Malcolm Butler playing defense had to step up and hit that interception. Vinatieri, special teams, had to hit 2 game-winning field goals in the last seconds. It's a team sport. But Tom Brady led his teams throughout his career to 10 Super Bowls in 20 years.
Yeah, I get it. But my point here, Eric, the reason why I brought this up is because the GOAT comparisons are always based on people trying to project forward. And the point of projecting forward is you can, again, if he blows out his knee and his career ends tomorrow, well, then this conversation's over. There's nothing he can do. That's it, whatever it is. If he goes next year and they retool and he goes back and wins another Super Bowl, that would be 4. That would make him 4-2 in Super Bowls. That's still pretty good. And then they go win another one in the second straight, 2 in a row with a gap in between, 4 out of 5. That's pretty good. And then we can revisit the discussion. The point, though, is at this stage in his career, the reason why the conversation even came up is at this stage in the career, he has already done things that Tom Brady did not do in this section of his career up until this point. So losing this hurts that entire discussion, but it doesn't wreck it because, again, the Patriots didn't win for 10 years. So you could have a 10-year drought right now in the middle of it, and technically you'd still be on track, technically. Because, again, it was 3 and 4 years right in that beginning, and then nothing for 10. 2 attempts, 2 losses to the other Manning brother, who wasn't a first ballot Hall of Famer, who, basically got looked over. And in terms of MVP, since you talked about it, Tom Brady didn't win his first MVP until age 30. Mahomes has already done that. He did not have a 50 touchdown season until age 30. Mahomes has already done that. So if up until this point, literally up until Sunday, he was already ahead of schedule and tracking in terms of the GOATdom discussion. As it is right now, this has pushed him back and stalled it. But again, here's a question. The knock on Tom Brady for those losses is 2 of them were to an Eli Manning-led Giants team that was great on defense, obviously. And that was what they focused on. That's where the focus was. But Eli Manning was very good in the Super Bowls when he needed to be. He was very clutch. So he got the job done in certain moments. Was it aesthetically pleasing? No, but it worked. It was just enough. So you still have to give him credit for that. And then Nick Foles had the game of his lifetime in that same game. You're talking about the 500 yard. Nick Foles also played extremely well, and he was the backup. He was the other guy.
And he actually caught a touchdown, unlike Brady, who can't catch anything because he has no athletic ability whatsoever.
Yeah. So Nick Foles put on the performance of a lifetime in that game. Like as good a performance as he's ever been put on by a guy walking off the street basically as the backup in that moment. So, but the point is though, the level of competition in those losses doesn't hold up over time. Eli Manning is a borderline Hall of Fame case, even with that, because he ended up as a 500 record quarterback. Playoff in terms of number of playoffs he made, not great. But his exclamation point, the reason why he's even a candidate is because of those 2 Super Bowl wins and who he was on the other side. That actually is his candidacy in a nutshell. You won 2 Super Bowls against Tom Brady. That is actually your resume. That's what everybody's going to look at. Nick Foles, no one's ever going to give him a sniff of anything Hall of Fame worthy, but he had one amazing run that, cement. In Philadelphia, he's a made man. He will never pay for a meal in Philadelphia. He's the dude. But that's his one claim to fame in that thing. Jalen Hurts played a great game overall. If Jalen Hurts turns out to be a great player down the road, if they continue to build around him and they still have that would be a pretty good opponent. And his other loss is to Tom Brady. So what if, Eric, he wins another couple of Super Bowls down the road and his only 2 losses are to Tom Brady, the current GOAT, and another guy who turns out to be a good quarterback? Those are not 2 terrible losses on your resume. That's not insulting to lose to 2 good quarterbacks.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I think we'll see what the next 2 years are like. And I will allow whispers.
Oh, so generous.
Of the discussion again in 2 years, depending on what he has done. But I don't want to hear him in the GOAT conversation for at least 2 years. Right now, I mean, if you had to compare him to somebody in the past, because that's, we all love doing that in sports, and you're not allowed to compare him to Brady or Montana, who do you compare him to? And I'm not just talking about his style, but his success, his dominance. And I'm looking at like Kurt Warner, 3 Super Bowl appearances, 1 win, 3 Super Bowl appearances, thousands and thousands of yards thrown.
You're talking about Mahomes now?
Huh?
You're talking about Mahomes now?
Yeah. Like
I think getting to 5 Super Bowls and winning 3 already passed Warner. He's already put Warner in the rearview mirror.
Do you compare him to Jim Kelly 4 in a row?
He didn't win.
Right. But I mean, who do you
You're also comparing, you have to think, and I said a few minutes ago, a while back, that the comparison of Mahomes to Lamar, but in fairness,
you should have said to be fair.
Kelsey, but when you're looking at the players that Kurt Warner had, or even Jim Kelly, they both had some pretty good teams around them. So I don't know that even you could compare the receiving pieces or rushing pieces with the likes of, a Marshall Faulk or a Thurman Thomas and an Andre.
Oh no! So to be clear on this, you just talked about a moment ago how he wasn't a Pro Bowler this year and everything. This is far and away. So here's the thing: it works for you and against you. And I don't want to spend too much more time on this, but just as a thought, just kind of what we're talking about here. What works for you and against you? Do you get rewarded because your team is not as talented as previous? Because I go back and look at some of the previous iterations of Kansas City where they got to a Super Bowl and or won. This is the least talented version of this team that has actually made this attempt. And Philadelphia handled them. But they were also the least talented version, which actually kind of hurts Buffalo a little bit because Buffalo's sitting there, wait a minute.
They actually, the Chiefs are and I think this is part of where I could see people comparing Mahomes and even Andy Reid to Brady and Belichick, because they're good at not building a superstar team, but building a system and pieces within that team that work really well to be successful. And if you want to throw the referees in for good measure.
Well, listen, it always helps. It always helps. It assists you.
But you were talking about the success and the Super Bowl appearances that Brady had and everything. I want to remind everybody that 2011, yes, the Patriots lost that Super Bowl against the Giants, but the Ravens almost made it to where they didn't even make it to that game if it wasn't for a dropped pass in the end zone by, I believe it was Lee Evans, and then a missed field goal by Billy Cundiff. Yeah, that one sucked. So
yeah. Missed it by that much. Just that much.
Just that much. Yep.
Damn. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Bottom line is that, again, it takes a little bit of luck. Like, honestly, if you want to be successful, you need a couple of things to bounce your way. And almost all the championship teams have 1 or 2 moments somewhere along the way where something bounces your way just right, or maybe you weren't expecting it and it happens. Again, congratulations to Philadelphia at the end of the day, whatever, fine. But in the long-term view, we'll see. I do think though that I do think Mahomes is already put on. Like his resume already is still very good. The problem is we're all living in the moment. Uh, if the thing had turned a different way and they had somehow scraped by and won the third in a row, well then the GOAT conversation would still be on because you just won three in a row, which has never been done in the Super Bowl era ever. So that's something that you've done that the other guy didn't do. So when you're trying to compare the two, that's what you're looking at. So right now, what do we just compare? Well, we compared, the type of loss. Well, Brady's lost three. The other guy's lost two. Oh, but he never lost one that badly. Well, that's true. That's fair. But, so far, as far as we know, Patrick Mahomes has never lost to a backup quarterback. So fair enough. 6 of one, half dozen of the other. We're splitting hairs now because we're not talking about just great quarterbacks.
It's a team sport of comparing quarterbacks. Brady threw for 500 plus yards in that game. So you can't blame Tom Brady for that.
I blame him. He should have thrown for at least 650.
You just can't.
Maybe 700.
It's a team game.
800.
500 plus yards.
Could you imagine if he had gone back and played defense like a man?
He's the most unathletic person in history.
He could be a pylon. He could just stand in the way.
No, he really couldn't. He screwed that up.
All right, can we move on with the Super Bowl? Okay, we've had our fun. We'll move on for now. Yeah. So on to the next, and then we'll be back for the next football season. And by the way, thank you to everybody.
Want to do something silly? Let's do something silly.
Oh, we're gonna do something silly. But the important thing, remember this: we will be back in the next football season, and I look forward to doing some more watch-alongs because they were fun. Thank you to everybody who participated in the chat and hung out at the watch-alongs. It was a good time. All right, real quick. Before I get to the silly card of the week, I want to mention this because this is near and dear to my heart. I think this is very important. The OGs will know that once upon a time, a staple of the Friday Night Live was the GOAT of GOATs. And this goes back to the Sunday Night Live because the Sunday Night Live ended Friday Night Live. The GOAT of GOATs, my guy, Ziggy Puffy. And as you may or may not be aware, the NHL has been doing one of its little gimmicky things that it likes to do, but it's got the NHL quarter century team. And it's been doing quarter century teams for all the franchises in the NHL. So you get a first team and a second team of all the different franchises. The Stars already had theirs, so all good there. But now one of them was the Los Angeles Kings quarter century team. And yes, the GOAT of GOATs is there, but they put him on the second team. This is an atrocity. This is inexcusable. How dare they? The GOAT of GOATs right here. Eric, what the hell is this? What is this sacrilege?
I don't know. We need to contact the NHL and put in a formal protest. This is unacceptable.
All I have to say is scandalous.
I've never even heard of Lubomir Visnovsky. I've never even
heard of Visnovsky? Oh, come on. The Lubomir Visnovsky? I actually do know who that is.
I don't. I know. Empey, Palfy, Williams.
It's not been a great time. Los Angeles Kings hockey in the last quarter century. Look, they won some Stanley Cups. Let's not take that away from them. But it's not been it's not like it's a storied history in the last quarter century. But again, they did win Stanley Cups, so credit to them for this.
They won like 2 of them in the last 25 years. So I mean,
and I think that's impressive. I give them credit for this. I give them credit for it.
Better than a lot of teams,
but it's not for necessarily star power. Star power is not exactly how they won that. They played a great team game. Going back to what we were talking about earlier, a great team game, I think is what got them there for that. But I thought it would showcase that.
I did see Boston Bruin great Felix Potvin in there though.
Mm-hmm. What's funny is teams that try to claim him. By the way, he's still one of the most popular people for Toronto. Like if Felix Potvin does a signing in Toronto, like the hardcores, they're still into it. Like they never won anything when he was there, but he's very beloved. He is an SB signature legend that people actually get behind.
Yeah.
I'm just saying. I'm just saying.
I mean, that was the height of his career. I mean, he played for a lot of teams. They were hoping to get back to how good he was when he was in Toronto. I mean, he was, there was a minute where he was the best goalie on the planet.
Yeah, his problem is that he's a reflex goalie, and so those guys don't necessarily age well. It's tough to maintain that if you're kind of because he was kind of back on the net. So it means if you basically got to buy him, you got to buy him. Like there was no, Usually the other guys like to be a little more forward and try to play the position a little bit. He's basically back of the net. He's reflex. If he can get the glove or the stick or the pad on it, that's great. But if it's not,
I think I have
they can go south real quick.
Somewhere around here. I have an autographed Bruins puck of his. Somewhere around here.
So I just thought I would share that. A sacrilege. The goat of goats not being respected properly, but an OG of the BIC channels.
We demand that our followers, start a formal protest and right this wrong.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Speaking of the followers or viewers or whatever, shout out to them because the comment section was on point for the last video, and that was much appreciated. Lots of chatter, lots of comments, lots of chiming in. So that was nice to see.
Indeed. I do want to touch on a couple of those comments, but before I do, I want to get into this here. So I want to talk about the silly card of the week. So something that is not sacrilege, something that is not scandalous, is AMG Collectibles. AMGcollectibles.ca, the AMG Collectibles YouTube channel. We'll be back this week with another fun edition, including some new items that came in the store. And I don't want to get people too excited. I don't want to get too riled up, but we might have some pre-war the hockeys. I'm just saying. Steve, the collector of the scallops, collector of the people, may have forwarded over to me pre-war the hockeys. So I might have some pre-war the hockeys to show you in the podcast episode that will drop on Wednesday. Wednesday morning is when those are dropping now. It will be there. We will do the episode. We'll talk about some new stuff. Pre-war the hockeys.
Yannick's going to like that a lot.
Very exciting. Just saying. So something to look forward to. We got a little bit of the new. We got a little bit of the old. And if new products are coming in, we'll talk about those too. So that'll all be in there. Thank you to AMG for supporting the channel and the podcast. Appreciate that. All right. Silly card of the week. Let's go over last week's results. So Sheesh received 25% of the vote. I do appreciate that. And very close. Number 2, number 3 were close again. The reason Eric loves hockey, Silly Faces, 28%. But the winner with just shy of 50% of the popular vote, just shy, was Defense Par Excellence. By the way, bonus to me for that beautiful title. The basketball card with the defense Par Excellence.
I couldn't argue with that. That card is utterly ridiculous.
Well, for all of those that are very indulged in basketball, and since that card came because we were discussing the trade, I find it even more hilarious. I did not realize Luka has not played since Christmas. And Anthony Davis is already injured for the Dallas Mavericks.
Yes, he is.
Oh, boy,
which, by the way, makes that deal. Here's the thing. Luka at least doesn't already have a big, long-standing injury history. And again, if he goes to the cryometric chamber and he goes to LeBron's compound and he gets him going and he gets him right, I see. But you knew Anthony Davis was going to get hurt. Like everybody knew.
I didn't expect it so soon.
They got one game out of him. They got one game out of the guy. Hilarious, hysterical. Yeah. The Mavericks general manager needs the Secret Service for protection right now. Yeah. Like he needs all the Secret Service. Oh my goodness.
They got to get Joel Embiid next on the team. Another injury-prone player.
Yeah, that trade is already aging like spoiled milk that came spoiled to start. Like it's aging very badly. It's not turning out well. But anyway, we do appreciate you voting. It is the true democracy in our hobby and in this world. Indeed. All right. So we got some new cards for you this week. First one here. So Eric, we'll start off with yours.
Okay.
And I can already see, like looking at it, I see the vision. I'm going to show it on the screen now. By the way, to get the maximum experience, you do want to see the video version of it because that way you'll be able to see it properly. I like to call it, here's Jerome.
Yeah, this is Jerome Aginla's peekaboo card.
This is 97-98 Upper Deck.
Yeah, and it is autographed, which is really cool if you could get your hands on one because he is a Hall of Famer. And another,
and it looks like it's a buyback because I see the numbering on the bottom, so it looks like it's a buyback card.
Another Boston Bruin great. So yeah, he looks miserable. It looks like he was being forced to do this photo shoot against his will.
His head is trapped inside of hockey sticks. How could he not be miserable?
Yeah, he looks like he's in jail. They stuck him in a black turtleneck and said, "Hey, pop your head out between these hockey sticks." And I mean, I would love to ask him about this. Like, a couple of weeks ago, he was on a card that I put in that he was playing ping pong. Okay, well, he was just playing ping pong with the guys, and someone took a photo of him. This was a photo shoot. Like, they did this to him. I would love to ask him what his recollection is of this photo shoot. And I can see it in his face that he's just like, get me the hell out of here.
Now, Brandon, I have a question. What if Eric is ever able to ask Jerome McGinley this question that he's proposing? He wants to ask him a question about this. And he's like, oh, yeah, I totally remember that. It was my idea. I wanted to be an artiste. And it turns out it was all his idea. He goes, I got the turtleneck. He goes, it's like, but you look like you're miserable. No, that's my blue steel.
Yeah. Yes.
As I was heading to the restroom to mop the floor.
Yeah, like this is what I'm doing. I was learning techniques from Peter Forsberg. He was teaching me the ways. Like, what if, Eric, it turns out like this is exactly what he was shooting for? Like, and you're disrespecting his art.
I would then say Jerome McGinley was a very tough player.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he wasn't an enforcer by any means, but I don't want him angry with me. So I'd go, you know something? I see it now, and I think it's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, I'm going to blow it up and hang it on my wall at home.
As you should, honestly. As you should.
That's what I would say.
It's pure art.
Thank you for not breaking my face.
Mm-hmm. So that is the first option. Allow me to present you number 2. Rex Hudler, also doing his blue steel. I like it. While hugging a pole, as you do.
Rex Hudler, the pole hugger.
I think he was preparing for the Philadelphia Eagles celebration. They were greasing the poles, and he's like, if I grab it, really, I've got gloves, and the gloves are rubber, so if I use the leather on the gloves for grip, then I can stay on the pole. Doesn't matter how much they grease it.
And
I just thought it was a silly card, and that's what this segment is all about. And
it's silly.
I used Rex, and this goes to show how the photography back in the day could be kind of crazy, because I actually used a Rex Hudler about 5 months ago. Also testament to the viewers and the voters and the podcast of the consistency of this. We've been doing this, I think, over 6 months now, but I used a Rex Hudler where he was milking a cow, and this time he's hugging a pole. So
So we did not plan this, and I know that some of you may think we planned these. No, the point, just to give you behind the curtain, I will select my card in isolation. Eric will go borrow something from the store, whatever it needs is required. And then Brandon will come up with his version of it. And then usually the guys will show me something. And what's happened a couple of times is I will sit there and go like, well, my card is going to thematically fit with this. This is going to be very funny. So we had Blue Steel Zero McGinley. We have Rex Hudler hugging a pole, again, making a face. Okay. So the third one, we're going vintage football. Vintage football is where we're going with this one. My selection this week is this.
Oh, good Jesus.
Right there. That is the face of intensity. That right there, Eric, that's a man. That's a man who says, Tom Brady, you go play defense and we'll beat Nick Foles.
I think he turned 50 and had to go see his doctor is what it looks like.
And he still played defense because Tom Brady is a wuss. He wussed out. He should have played both sides of the ball, and he could have defeated Nick Foles. But this man would not let him off the hook for that, Eric. If this man was on that team, you think Tom Brady's looking at that face and say, no, sir, I'm a quarterback. I play. No, you're going out there.
That is something else. Now, who is this gentleman?
So I'm going to reveal this. So I wanted to share the image first. This is a classic vintage football card, but I will tell you what it is. So this card is actually from 1967 Royal Castle. This is 1960s. X-Strip will appreciate this. 1967 Royal Castle, Miami Dolphins. You can tell he plays by the Miami Dolphins because, again, look at him.
Mm-hmm.
Ah! That's the audio sound to go along with it,
Yeah.
You feel it, Eric? Do you feel it?
Oh, I'm feeling it. That is something else.
So you see, it worked out. Intensity, Eric. This is the kind of intensity I expect you to start bringing.
Yeah.
When we start the podcast, I need this. Urgh! Let's go.
I stand by my comment. It looks like he just turned 50.
There you go. That is a silly. Brandon, I believe this week we have successfully, once again, hit 3 for 3 on the silliness required for the silly card of the week. I think
It's
we
been a
nailed
good
it.
segment.
It's been working. So I will create a community post. You can vote on your selection. Again, remember that man might still be alive. Look at his face. I'm just warning y'all. Do you want to fuck with that guy? I don't. Think about it. I'm just saying. We thank AMG for supporting the channel, the podcast, and again, the silly card of the week. So there we are. All right, let's move on here. I do actually want to touch on a couple of comments since Brandon didn't bring it up. I won't read all of them, but again, fantastic participation. But I do want to see if I can hit on a couple of these because there were some pretty good ones. Let me quickly scroll through. A little bit of the commentary did fall regarding the YouTube Sports Card Hall of Fame and kind of our discussion on it. So a lot of the comments were based on that. Shoebox Legends, who was also one of the candidates on there as well, that went through the list. So talked about, just had to comment on what you guys said about the YouTube Hall of Fame. Really resonated with me. Great content. It was refreshing to hear some different opinions than what I normally get in my feed. Cheers. So thank you for that. Great comment. Appreciate it. Baz, Baseball Card Convention, said, good showing, fellas. Only Bobbles remains a true Hall of Famer to date. The Civil War Soldier Hall of Fame. And I thought that was valid that he appreciated and acknowledged it. I thank you, Baz, for that.
You're still adjacent, Eric. I'll let you be on board.
Ooh, you can be Civil War Hall of Fame adjacent. Oh, that is exciting. That is exciting.
Oh, and I have to say, this is a comment on one of my videos. I'm not trying to poach the comment section, but I think the channel is Bargain Boxer or a Bargain Boxer or something like that. They commented on my most recent video and said, "You are now my most favorite 65-year-old YouTuber." And my wife seen the email pop up when the comment came through, and she was like, "Oh Lord, they're at it again." So she knows that y'all give me crap, and it's all in fun. I just replied.
I just assumed you were flattered he took a 1 off the number. I just assumed you were like, 65? I don't feel a day over 105. Thank you, sir.
Actually, I just replied and said with the little emojis, like the thank you emojis, I said, Ma, I made it.
There you go. Well, you saw what I wrote not too long ago, that if you're 44, I'm 28.
Hey, whatever it takes, man.
Whatever it takes, yeah.
Whatever it takes.
Orlando, a collector's dream, also commented here. Great stuff, Carlos. Missed the live stream. Thank you, Eric, for the non-congratulation. I'm glad he appreciated you for that. CRT Sports Cards. So Chris from CRT Sports Cards also commented here. Love the analysis of the Hall of Fame voting. Would have been interesting to see the result if they were made public afterwards. So that actually was a comment that brought up the idea of what if it was anonymous at first and then the official results became available after, if that would impact the momentum thing that we were touching on. So I think it's an interesting point. I don't know how, the problem is I think you'd lose something with it. I guess you would have to, everybody would have to send something to Jake so that he could see it himself, and then he would still have to count it. But then you know what would happen. Some people would be like, oh, but you didn't count all the ballots and now it's secret and you can hide ballots. And it's like, yeah. You'd invite that. It's the same idea as when some folks are saying like, yeah, it's a no-win, but that's the same idea as when some people were like, well, why don't you let the commenters vote? We can make profiles. Like I have multiple YouTube channels, so then I can vote for my, if the other one didn't say BIC wrestling and the icon was something different, I could vote for me. Like there's no bar, there's no barrier, there's no way to really check and confirm that somebody didn't mess about and create additional accounts. They're free. Well, you can make as many as you want.
I did sports card content on Friday. So in a year from now, I will be eligible to vote.
Very exciting. Paul C. did respond in terms of the Geico commercial. So what Brandon was talking about. So he did respond to that. So excellent. Thank you for that, Paul. Zach here also commented on the Luka buying a $50 million house in Dallas. So thank you for that. Again, really good comments. So I'm summarizing because I don't want to read every single individual one, but I want to make sure at least I touch on it. And then Dan's Vintage Baseball PC. So Dan was touching on this as well. Brandon is definitely correct about the power of suggestion with the YouTube Hall of Fame. That's why I voted on the first full day. I really feel like I could have given Carlos some momentum if he had not specifically told me not to vote for him. I did say that.
Yeah.
And I did respond to that. I'm going to give my response to that too. Next year, I will be the wind beneath your wings. And then my response to that was totally understandable, Dan. My expectation was to let it sit. But Eric's impassioned plea for Hall of Fame adjacency swayed me with entertainment value. If only he had thought to make the pitch earlier in the election season, disaster could have been averted.
Yeah.
It is
but
true.
We have 1 year to beg for votes and to pander. And
I think that's going to
pandering. So
it's the only thing that needs to be done now. Now we know.
yes.
Jeff McMahon said, great. No Hall of Fame adjacent equal Lions curse lives on for at least another year. It's facts. It is what it is.
Pay me the money they owe me. I'll lift the curse.
Eric's favorite commenter, Josh, commented here. I feel like we need a tiebreaker for the silly card of the week. Perhaps who can do a Civil War reenactment better. Again, with the Civil War. I wonder who he's referring to. Thoughts? My response was, I'm feeling a satisfying combination of Civil War costumes in Thunderdome. I love me some Thunderdome. Always love some Thunderdome. Let's see here. Oh, here we go. Bobbles, a great commenter as well. It's funny how some of the guys in the YouTube Hall of Fame are adamant about war and longevity stats for Cooperstown, but the YouTube Hall of Fame votes are all about, I like this guy. It's a group of mostly show and tell vintage card channels because that's what the members like. It doesn't really reflect the wide range of content that is out there. That said, I like the 2025 class and many previous inductees, which is fair. I get you.
I'm showing vintage content.
Vintage. And then Rob also included here. It needs to be seen as well as heard. Whatever it is, it's entertaining. And thank you, Rob, for the comments. So very good comments, Brandon. Excellent engagement. Excellent participation. Yeah. Please, in future, feel free to chime in on different things. I know it's not always as scandalous as the YouTube Hall of Fame, but, occasionally we'd love to hear your thoughts on some of these things when we do bring them up. And Eric will keep on showcasing some vintage just to appease the vintage masses. So we'll keep working on it for the next year. Okay, so we got that covered. Let's see. I think there's one more thing I wanted to briefly mention, and that is 2025 Top Series 1. If you guys are nostalgic, you can have some fun with some no-name on front variations. I just wanted to point that out. It's kind of interesting. Also, 2 quick hitters there. Number 1, looking forward to the hobby documentary. That'll be dropping, I think, on Sunday. I'll be checking that out. And if it comes to pass, if it is dropped on Sunday, I may be watching it from location nearby the Hamilton Comic-Con because the Burrell has talked me into visiting this card show. And probably by the next recording we do, I will be able to report back on what happened at that show.
Is that the one with 5 trillion attendance?
Yes, approximately.
Okay.
So let me explain the reference just so to get everybody caught up to speed. On our Discord, we have fun moments. Eric, I know this may come as a shock, but sometimes people do like to exaggerate to make their point. So one of the folks on there was trying to make the point that the TCG card shows are so much bigger than sports cards. Now, by the way, there is a reasonable argument to be made that, look, they've gotten PSA's grading is almost 50-50 down the middle with TCG and sports cards. This is the TCG side of it and the Pokemans. The Pokemans are running wild. It's like Hulk Hogan back in the day. What you gonna do when the Pokemans run wild on you? That's what's happening. They're running wild all over the place. So, and even that card show that Bobby was at last week, it was predominantly Pokemon collectors and Pokemon dealers. If you just do a Pokemon show or TCG show, you will do fine. You don't need a single sports card in the room and you will do just fine right now. And part of that, and I said it on the AMG podcast, and Sherry is kind of the perfect demographic for this because she falls right into it. There's a lot of folks that were collecting in the early days of Pokemon because I remember Pokemon first hit the stores. I was aged out of it because by the time I was into it, I am the youth of this podcast. Again, Brandon takes up, he is age before beauty. Eric is pretty old, but by the time Pokemans came out, 99, I was already in high school, well into high school, a couple of years in already. So I was aged out of that. I remember the cartoon. My younger brother watched it. So I am familiar. I'm not ignorant of it. And I remember how popular it was. It was very popular when it first came out for sure. And people were the Charizard.
I remember it, and one reason that I got into it is in 1999, it was the first year I moved in November of 99 to Indiana, but I came back home for Christmas because my little brother, and he would have been 10 at that Christmas. And there was a photo that always stood out of me and him together. and that was because there was a shitload of Pikachu behind him on Christmas Day. But you mentioned like the collector side of it and what Sherry had talked about and everything. And I have two things here. And if anybody out there wants to chime in, I think this would be a good one to get the comment section going up as well.
Sure.
So Neo mentioned recently, because Peter, SGC, said that vintage is anything, I believe it was 80 and older, right? And it like made all of the melting hearts be, how could anything from 1980s be vintage? But it's always cracked me up because Pokemon coins their early stuff as vintage. And that's
For
literally
them, relatively, it is. For them, it kind of is the dawn of the.
But it's
TCG.
just funny, like the tide to it, because it's like, well, shit, that's 20 years later than this stuff. But also to the collector side, I kind of mentioned this in the Discord. I don't follow the pricing and all that stuff much, but I have a couple that I listed on eBay of Pokemon cards. And I went back to review to see, like, had the market been up, down, where was it at? And it was very alarming. And we can talk about it maybe a little bit in the next topic coming up that we were going to discuss. But
sure,
I was noticing that with the modern or ultra modern stuff in Pokemon, how expensive it is in a 10 and how much the PSA 9s and PSA 8s were moving versus a PSA 10 selling. And it was a wildly different scenario than sports cards, where so many people were like wanting the 10 and buying the 10 and everything else. In Pokemon, the 10s are priced really high, where the 9 is like a small fraction of what the 10 is. And it seems like the audience is buying up a lot of the 9s and even the 8s. So that was kind of surprising to see, be in a different space. But also, I think it could just be related with the collectors spending their hobby dollars wisely. Instead of paying $1,500 for a label with a 10 on it, they're spending $60 for a 9 or $75 for a 9 and, you know, $30 or $40 for an 8, which I think is freaking awesome for the collector side of it.
Sure. And I think, look, to your point, I think a big part of it is that it isn't necessarily a pissing contest. It's not necessarily and this will touch on the point that I was making, and I promise I'll circle it back around to the Discord discussion while we were having some fun with it. But the point was that because it is focused on that collector side of it, a lot of those people, and the reason why I brought up the timing and everything, I was in high school by that point, so I was kind of aged out of it. It wasn't really my deal. But again, I was in the store when those packs were being opened initially. And I remember kids opening them up and going after the Charizard because it was already the hit card. People knew that. And when a kid pulled one, it was very exciting for them and everything. So I remember that, being in the store and watching them open the packs. But the thing was, if somebody was a kid around that time, and this is an important thing, and I think Eric can attest to this because we've all experienced this. If you're a kid in 1999 and you're born in 1990, well, in 1999, you're 9 years old. Or let's say you're born in 92 or 93. You're 6 years old in 1999. Okay. That's 26 years ago. So you're 6 years old then. That's 26 years ago. That means now you're 32. You may have kids of your own who in turn may be interested in Pokemon, but you can relate to them because literally you were collecting it as a kid. So now you're sharing. And if you have any of your cards left over, you can literally share your OG Pokemon cards with your now new kid, who is then experiencing it for themselves. You play the game together or whatever. The point that I'm getting at is that now those kids are of the age where the nostalgia is combined with the fact that if you're in your early 30s-ish, you may already be somewhat established, at least to the point that you may have a job that pays well enough that allows you to in turn buy the cards, which now allow. So right now, that generation is just hitting around that point. And now they may be willing to. So I use Sherry as an example because she had some of those cards, and so for her, she's collecting those cards. She collects the Mew and the Mewtwo. That's a character that she likes. Well, great. That's awesome. Like it is exactly right. Well, she runs a card shop. She owns the card shop. So think the access you have with that. But again, think of all those other people around the same age bracket who are now able. You know what? I could never get that Charizard when I was 6 years old, and now is my time. My time is now.
And this this is the exact argument, or not really an argument, but it's the exact feeling and sentiment that I have expressed, where a lot of people in sports cards thought I was crazy because, and
In
all
fairness,
we
you
can
are
do is
crazy, but not
respect.
necessarily about that.
Yeah,
And
well,
an ass.
sure, but you have to take your life experiences and things that you see. And I've seen what my son, like his interest growing up, he was always in the TCG stuff, both Yu-Gi-Oh, Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, all of that. And then, like I said, I remember 1999, my brother was 10 years old. He was massively into the Pokemon stuff. And tying all of that together, and like Carlos said, if you do the math there, my brother, if he was still here today, hopefully would have had kids, and I guarantee he would have been into that again because he loved it when he was a kid and sharing it with his kids today. When we were growing up, when we were 10 years old, there wasn't Pokemon. There wasn't really TCG stuff. And so it was sports cards or maybe TV show cards, or you had like maybe Ninja Turtle cards or that sort of thing. But the fact that Pokemon and a lot of these TCGs ties into TV shows, movies, video games, toys, all of that stuff as well, it has a significant reach beyond just those cards. And the cards were also utilities because you played a game with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's why I was saying the future outlook. I wasn't saying vintage is trash and it's boring, whatever, but you're
I
going
think
to
it's
start
exactly what you're saying.
phasing out. And I know people don't want to hear this, but the interest will start phasing out as time goes on because there's something else that those generations were more attached to than us looking at a Beckett magazine and dreaming about owning a Mickey Mantle or a Willie Mays or whatever. It's just, or our parents showing us, or our grandparents showing us and talking about those players. The kids in the future or current even now are going to hear about these amazing Pokemons and Charizards and Mews and all that stuff. So it's just a transition of generations and interests.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I agree. But that's the thing. The key part of that whole conversation, the reason why it made all the sense in the world to me was that we've hit that cycle. Now we're there because those kids who are hitting their early 30s, late 20s, early 30s, depending on them, even into the mid or late 30s, whatever, that's still of the correct age, especially the late 20s, early 30s, where they're just about hitting established. Again, they may have kids, and now they're trying to recapture their youth. Well, their youth is Pokemon. Well, if that's what it is, well, then that's where the money's going to get funneled. It only makes sense.
One other thing to mention, and this is something to bring up because it's touched on at points within sports cards, but it's way more prevalent into the TCG space. You just mentioned Sherry and her, enjoying collecting and her
She's got
her
collection.
liking Pokemon. There is a much larger female audience in that side too, which helps build the audience base over what we have in sports cards because you have a mix of, it's a worldwide thing, obviously, but then you have both, male and female that are big into it. So it's easier to grow that audience than it is your male predominant, mid 30s, 40s, I guess mid 20s now, sports people. So
you've got the bigger demographic. You've got
Yep.
access to the bigger demographic, and it's built in from the time they're kids, so they're not
Right.
excluded from it early. And because they're not excluded from it early, again, later on in their life, they could be like, they'd still be interested. So it's not just dad necessarily sharing
Right.
Pokemon with the kids. It could be mom too.
Yep.
Maybe they both played the game when they were kids, and now it carries. Well, what if both parents collected, and it carries over, and there's a little nostalgia there? Well, Eric, you're going to get a lot less friction if you're bringing some Pokemon into the house. If mom collected when she was a kid and dad collected when they were kids, and they were both into it, and they're both getting a kick out of, hey, remember when this? Yeah, I remember that one. I had one of those. Way easier sell. Way
And they're
easier
not
sell
doing
across the
bad
board.
things. They're not that the whole joking thing. Charizard's not going to tear an ACL or whatever, but it's true. Like they're not getting injured. They're not retiring. They're not doing bad things where they're getting arrested or whatever. So it's kind of also a safe thing to enjoy. So
Listen, I don't know. That Pikachu has kind of dead eyes. He might be into some bad things. He might be into a bad scene. I'm just saying. Just throwing it out there. I got questions. All right. I know me some shadiness. I can sniff it out. I got questions about that Pikachu.
I'm just saying that Pokemon's looks like he been on a little bit of that booger sugar. That's all I'm saying.
Wow. Eric
Whoa.
bringing drugs into this. Yeah, as the resident cyclist, no wonder he brings, as the resident cyclist, he has to bring drugs into this. Like he has to. He's contractually obligated. It's terrible. Anyway, moving on. So if you enjoy your Pokemans, and we understand, and like it makes sense. So the bottom line was that the one person on the Discord there, the one participant, was talking about the TCG being super popular, which I agree with. So to clarify on this, the reason why we had fun with it is I don't disagree that TCG is super popular. I don't disagree that a TCG show right now will do extremely well because there's plenty of audience for it. Kids, adults, 20-somethings, to Brandon's point, and then adults as well who may want to recapture the youth. They may all be interested in that. So there's plenty of audience for it. The point, though, is he was coming up with all these outlandish numbers and just kind of citing something that a promoter sort of told. It's like, please, if you're trying to make a point, don't just borrow a number that was pulled out of thin air without any citation or anything. Like that's why it was my response was what Brandon was referring to. I was teasing him.
Yeah, it was a joke.
We had a show over the weekend, Eric, and the Burrell was there, and like the line was across the block. It was like 300 trillion people there. Sure, that number sounds outlandish, but I don't have to verify it, so whatever. We're going with it. 300 trillion people.
300 trillion.
And let me tell you, if we do a big show, if we do a real big show, 500 trillion.
What I'm upset about, and I made it known in the comments of our group text, is how dare they make the Burrell stand in line for their silly little Pokemans show.
The Pokemans do not respect the bro.
And I think we all need to get on up there, all of us. All right. We got to fly people in from the Massachusettses and the Virginiases and the Quebecs and the Halifaxians. We got to fly everyone in, and we need to go to war with these people.
I'm not fighting big Pokemon, Brandon. Big Pokemon's got a strong army.
Swords and shields.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, right? And I got to be honest, the sports card demographic, they're kind of old. I got to be honest, they skew real old. Those youngins, they still got their original hips. I can't say that for some people here.
That's literally the card that's in the pack that you get the I don't know how you play the game, but there's energy cards in there. They got the energies.
That is the end of our Pokemon discussion. We're stopping right there. Every time we bring it up at AMG, I'm just like, Sherry, take it away. You explain it. The only Pokemans I know is Charizard, Pikachu, and the Cheestringamon, which I personally coined.
I will say, I'm going to admit this. I had a lot of fun, and it's kind of sad that it fizzled out, the popularity of it. I had a lot of fun playing Pokemon Go when it got super popular in the beginning. Me, my wife, my kids, we'd all go out. We would be nerds, hit the Pokestops and everything, spin them, and it was a lot of fun. So
I did it with my daughter. She was in like elementary school at the time, and she thought that was the greatest thing ever, and it got us out of the house and out for a walk.
Yep.
And she was super excited. Other than being a dad, spending time with my kid, and her being happy and excited, it brought me no joy. I didn't understand how full-fledged adults were going out on their own and doing this and taking it very seriously. I mean, there was some legal interactions and the fights, and I think there was a couple of murders, and things went wrong with adults doing this.
Things always go wrong with adults doing things.
Yeah, adults ruin everything.
Yeah. I was going to say,
me and my daughter, going out and walking around downtown and, having these things hit and her getting super excited.
Yep.
Awesome. Absolutely fantastic. Loved it. she didn't even know she was getting exercise. You know,
We actually went up to DC a couple times along the waterway because it was a good spot, and me and the wife and the kids would go up there. And like you said, it was just nice. You could walk, and you know, it was everybody was getting out of the house doing something. And even though it was on a stupid little phone and a little game, it was people were out and about and doing stuff. So
it was awesome.
Yes, I agree 100%. It was fun.
And then adults ruined it.
Yep.
Like I said, Eric, adults ruin everything. And so I've said a lot. I've said oftentimes, Brandon. The problem is everybody keeps talking about the kids with the Pelican cases and all that. No. It's the adults ruining it. If all of y'all would get out, it'd be fine. Y'all are the ones ruining it. Just saying. But anyway, all right. So we covered that, and I bet you didn't have Pokemon Go on the bingo card. I didn't, and we wound up there anyway.
Hey,
it is what it is. Feel free to leave your Pokemon Go memories in the comments. May as well.
I might actually have a video. Let me see if I still have it.
All right, so let's do this. So I think timing-wise, we're doing all right. So I think let's do it, Eric. Well, you wanted to talk about the scandalousness that was PSA changing their standard, republishing the standard, whatever it is for the specific ones at the top.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so do me a favor. Summarize your main concerns and feelings on it. I've pulled something up here that we can use as a reference point to talk about it, and then go for it. We'll go from there.
Well, you and I have discussed this briefly off air. Mm-hmm. I know we have different opinions on it. You very...
I have the correct one, and you have others. Yes. Go on.
You're very scientific and matter of fact. I am more...
about your feeling. Singular.
About my feeling. I'm more emotional with my feeling and more common sense, and and understanding that rule number 1 and 2 exists for a reason. You try to be more analytical about it, and I think that goes against our philosophies. But I think it is a poor idea. Now I'll say it in Boston. Now, give you an example. I think it's a poor idea. You hear the R at the end of idea?
Uh-huh.
That's very common. The word idea is how we say it down here. So
I often think you have ideas.
Yeah.
A lot of ideas.
That's how we say it. So anyway,
go on.
I think it's a POA idea to make this change. You are the number 1 grading company in the world. You have, built your business on these standards. I've never agreed with those standards. I always thought those standards were ridiculous. I have voiced my opinion 1,000 times that I think a 10 on for all card companies should be perfect. And I think they should be rare. To go from 60-40 to, what did they do? 45-55 or something?
55-45, 55-45.
Yeah. Just out of the blue is going to upset people. It is going to make people believe that the cards that they have had for years are now not as valuable as the ones that will be graded in the future. It is going to upset people. I can see it now where you're at a show and there's a card there, and whether you're trying to sell it or buy it, the guy behind the table is going to say, well, you see how this card is from 2023. All right. Those aren't as valuable as this one here from 2025, because in 2025, they were a lot stricter. So when this says it's a 10 or a 9 or whatever, that's like your 9 being like a 7 now. So this is going to be the difference. I'm going to charge you more on this 2025 one, and I'm going to pay you less for that 2023 one. And they're going to play that game. And that's going to be the new game played at card shows and card shops.
Okay.
And I just think it was unnecessary. You've already become number one. There's no need to make this change now. And you should have, in the very beginning, had better standards and built your company on much better standards than you did. Because remember the joke I used to do about I used to sit over here and show people what 60/40 looked like? You know, and
I think that should have been a continual gimmick. I think you should have done it more than
and
once.
I'm like, this, look how stupid this is. This is PSA grading your cards. This is a 10. Hey, everybody, look, this is a 10. Well, guess what? Now this is a 10. This is stupid. Okay. This is a 10, people. This is a 10. Not what I just showed you, but that's what PSA built their company on. And to change it this much out of the blue, you are going to send a tidal wave tsunami through the collecting hobby. And like I said, people are going to be now fighting over, well, what year was that graded versus this current grade and new standards and price differences. And it's going to be a big thing. So that's my opinion.
Indeed. So Brandon, I'm going to ask, could I ask a favor of you? I'm going to come back to this, but I want to make sure I don't lose sight of it. I want to make reference to coins, but not yet. Not yet. I want to start off with what Eric's talking about now, but if you could please remind me to make reference to the coins, because I have a point I want to make about that. So let me quickly touch on this, and then Brandon, feel free to chime in and interrupt me at any time, because I've got a couple of things I want to touch on. Eric's points. My first point in response to this. What Eric's referring to about people using the timing of the holder and the labels, that is going on already. That has been going on for several years. The original OG PSA labels, people would discount them because they say the newer ones were more strictly graded. That has actually been going on for several years. But when I say several years, I mean like 10. I remember being at card shows where people would make that argument about the old PSA labels, the OG ones versus the newer ones. So that is never going to stop. And the coins thing is where I'll bring that up again, because it's actually gone on there longer than sports cards. But I want to come back to that first. Second, this is really important, and I'm going to take my 5% more serious tone on this one, because I do actually want to convey the message and get it across to others who may also feel this way. Grading standards have always played this game, and that's whether it's SGC before the purchase. I'm not even talking about after collect. I'm talking about before that. PSA or CGC, or even Eric's favorite, Beckett. Every single one of them utilizes the same type. So you remember how we talk about Panini uses the vague verbiage that says not from any specific event, whatever, but it's worded in such a way as to leave some latitude. Maybe it is game use, but probably not. But it could be, but maybe it isn't. It's open-ended. I'm going to use SGC's grading standards. I'm actually going to leave PSA to last. I'm going to use SGC's first, and then I'm going to go to CGC's. I'm going to read it to you. And then I'm going to stop and focus on certain specific words, because it's important. Because 99% of the people complaining, and I think you'll agree with this, Brandon, 99% of the people complaining have no idea what the standard said in the first place. And they have no idea what they've never looked at them. They've never looked at them, ever. And they have no clue what it is. So they don't even know what they're complaining about. So that's the first. Okay, here's SGC's. I'm going to read it to you. This is for Gem Mint. So Gem Mint 10, not Pristine 10. I'll get to that in a second, but Gem Mint 10. So we're talking apples to apples with what we're talking about here. Okay, here it says 55-45 or better centering. That means under SGC's current standard, 55-45 is meant to be the upper limit or better centering. Sharp focus for sharp corners, and then there is an asterisk on that, but nonetheless, free of stains, no breaks in surface gloss, no printer refractor lines, no visible wear. A slight print spot visible under close scrutiny is allowable if it does not detract from the aesthetics of the card. I want to focus on that last sentence. Is allowable if it does not detract from the aesthetics of the card. And this is important. Whenever you've got a card and it is utilizing centering, centering is the only part of grading that is truly objective. Because if I hand you a ruler and I've got a ruler and we're using the ruler properly and we actually know how to use a ruler, As long as we're measuring it the same way, we should come to the same result because we're measuring it. This is a measurement. It's objective. It's not your opinion. So that is the only objective measurement there is. But here's the thing. As a grader, you do have latitude, and this has always been the case. This isn't a new thing, and this isn't only PSA. You have the ability to say, okay, it meets that requirement. Does everything else meet the requirement? Because if anything else is borderline or a little bit off, you can immediately knock it down. And if you're a stricter grader, by your nature, you're not as tolerant of it. You may not be okay with it. Might be 55-45 right on the dot. But if there's anything that even remotely looks off, a fraction of a fraction of a fraction, no, you know what? I'm not doing the 10 on this one. I'm doing a 9.5 because you've got a 9.5 that is available to you. Because 9.5 is a card that at first glance appears to be a Gem Mint upon close inspection. It may have a tiny flaw or flaws that keep it from getting a Gem Mint 10. That's vague. A tiny flaw or flaws? What kind of tiny flaw? There's different options. Like it could be whatever. It could be a little surface thing. It could be a print dot. That's up to you. It's open to your subjectivity. That's right in the grading standard. CGC. 10. I'm going to focus on 10. A Gem Mint 10 card that's received a 10 grade overall. However, one of the grading criteria does not meet the requirements of a pristine 10. Corners will appear to be perfect to the naked eye and mint plus under 10x magnification. The surface is free of print spots and should also display perfect gloss, devoid of any surface flaws. Centering is not to exceed approximately. I added the word approximately on top of it. So I didn't even say it. I said to not to exceed, but I'm saying not to exceed approximately 55-45. And reverse centering is not to exceed 75-45. You notice there's no approximately on the back, but there wasn't approximately on the front. You know what's the great part about approximately, Eric? It leaves a little bit of wiggle room there. If it's 55.5 to 44.5, it might get through. 60-40 is the absolute upper limit, to be honest. If you got a 60-40-10, you were always on the borderline. And by the way, a buyer could look at that. Let's talk about aesthetics, right? Let's talk about, the infamous eye appeal. Brandon, it could say 10 on the label, but if it's clearly 60-40 centering, I'm not going to value it as much as a properly centered copy, am I? They both say 10, but I'm going to treat one as different as the other, and I'm just looking at the card.
There's one thing that if you took and did a poll in the hobby, you're not going to get 100% results, but I would be willing to bet you're going to get a majority vote that centering is the most important factor of a card for collectors that go for eye appeal, because it is one thing that is going to instantly be obvious to you. The corners, yes. If depending on what the borders are like, you might spot a ding or something on the corner. You might need to observe it up close. A surface scratch, you might need to see it in a certain light. We've seen cards with creases that just looking at it, you can't really tell. You gotta inspect it closer. Mm-hmm. But centering is going to be obvious. The only time it won't is if it's a borderless card and you have to figure out how in the hell they measured it to begin with. But in terms of eye appeal and attractiveness of the card, I think the majority of people out there that, you're going to have some, well, I want nice registry. I want nice color, bold color, especially on the vintage side of things. But I think overall you would have a larger portion of collectors that say a nice centered card is appealing to me. So
I agree. And I've actually lived that. So just to use an example from this podcast, if you remember, I think it was last week, I mentioned that I had bought that card from Fanatics, that Whitey Ford.
The Whitey Ford, I believe.
The 53 Bowman color. So that card is actually a downgrade compared to my other one. I actually have a 4 in Beckett. So BVG 4. The edges are very sharp. The corners are pretty sharp and everything. The image on it is pretty solid, but it's clearly off center, like very clearly. I made a choice to go with this other one that is still a fairly clean copy, but it's actually a downgrade. I think it was 2.5 or 2. It was one of those. But regardless, it was a downgrade, but the centering on it is nicer. The corners are a little bit more rounded comparatively because it's a lower grade card. But I was okay with that because aesthetically, I liked the centering, the way it framed the card. On a 53 Bowman color, I really like the cards to be framed nicely. So having a little bit better centering improves the aesthetic. I made a decision. As a collector, I made a choice technically to downgrade. And that's on lower condition. We're talking lower condition stuff. We're not talking about the top of the food chain here. My point is I used the CGC one and I used the SGC one because I gave you two different ways of wording this. But there has always been some latitude built into this. The problem is, if you're talking about borderline 10s that are right at the end of centering, there's a lot of collectors who will reject that 10 anyway, just in principle, because they'll, to your point, the centering is the part that is most easily identifiable for most folks, especially if a card has borders. You can look right away and you're going to see it's a little tilted. Or maybe it's a card that's diamond cut. You're going to see there's a little bit of that tilt going on. It's going to look off to you. Immediately your eyes are going to immediately go to that, gravitate to it, and go to the edge on the left and the edge on the right are not the same size. Or top and bottom are not the same size. There's a shift one way or the other. So nothing Eric said was technically incorrect. But the problem is that I'm looking at it from the perspective of I'm listening to who is yelling the loudest. And I'm like, but if you're a vintage collector, you're not collecting 10s, so it doesn't affect you at all. Like it doesn't. But if you happen to be the one person who is a vintage collector who collects 10s and pays that premium, bless you. Like, sponsor us. But outside of that, hey, I'll take the check. But the point is, the majority of people. So Eric, your 69 70s are not impacted by this. Whether they're graded or not, they are not impacted by this because the likelihood of you having a 10 anywhere in that room is very minimal.
I also want to point out, I don't think people necessarily understand. Yes, 60-40 to 45 or 55-45 is a change in the standard. But when you actually break it down to the amount of difference in measurement, it is very tiny. Like it's you got 5 there, and it's not a lot. It would be enough to potentially be noticeable with the eye, but people have always critiqued PSA 10s that are at the 60-40 border anyway. So again, like you said, if somebody's buying it and it's one of those that is like, how in the hell did I get a 10? Likely the person's going to have to sell it at a little bit of a bargain anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms, and I don't have the full math here, but if somebody was to break it down mathematically, it's probably a very small amount side to side that the difference in a 60-40 to 55-45 is.
Yeah. Well, the one thing that I would throw out there also, kind of in the same vein, and you can speak to this as, as a bulk submitter from that perspective. Let me throw this at you. If someone actually wants a 10 and they think in their mind, there's two scenarios that I see in a lot of these cases. So let's talk about the 60-40 borderline one. By the way, my opinion is that I think prior to them changing the wording on it, I think that if some of those graders were probably already looking at that and were probably not handing out the 10s for the 60-40s for some time. I don't think that's a recent phenomenon. I think it formalized what should have been. And one point that I'll make, and I think Brad would agree with this, I'd say it to him and I'd say it to anybody there at PSA as well. The communication is where they really fell apart on this one. They really did a very poor job. They should have just come out, hey guys, by the way, we've been not that limit, the 60-40 has been there, but it's very few cases where we're actually going to give a 10 for a 60-40 because oftentimes we don't believe that's appropriate. Our graders have been a little bit more stringent on that for some time. And realistically, we don't think that 60-40 makes sense in the long run. But to Eric's point originally, when PSA started in 1991, that grading space in cards was new. That's why I want to make sure I mention the coin thing in a minute. It was new to them. But the problem is, at that time, you're making it up. Remember, gem mint is not a grade on the grading scale. It did not exist until grading came into being. Mint was meant to be the top of the food chain. That was. So when we were growing up, mint was perfection.
Mm-hmm.
Mint was the ultimate. There was no more. And then all of a sudden you came up with this gem mint. Well, even then in gem mint, you left a little latitude. You left a little room. And SGC acknowledges this because they've got a pristine beyond gem mint.
Mr. Minty didn't name himself Mr. Minty, he, to be the best, or he would have been Mr. Gem Minty.
Obviously. But the point is, so SGC has a pristine level that accounts for 50-50 centering, like bang on. And then Beckett has the black label That is meant to be like, for that one, 50-50, it better be, that's the whole point. They're supposed to be 50-50.
Yeah, Beckett doesn't. I don't want to shit on Beckett because we always do, but
That's
their
kind of Eric's
grading
job.
scale makes the least sense because they actually have the two pristines, and I don't agree with a pristine that has any sort of flaw, and that's where the gold pristine takes the cake there because you can have the 310s and the 9.5, and I don't feel that the 9.5 should be conducive to call a card pristine. So
I'd agree with that. That's fair. But I think the point, though, that I'm trying to get at, and the reason why I wanted to really make sure that I singled it, that's why I said, if you notice, I've taken a very kind of chill approach on this because I really want to make sure I don't want the message to get lost in our general silliness. I
And
feel like it's important enough.
on the terms of SGC, and if Eric's listening still, I'm going to be blatantly obvious or honest. If you take a gem mint and a pristine, you're likely not going to be able to tell what the difference in them are.
Sure.
Just plain and simple. And I've actually sold some of my gold label pristine SGCs for that fact. And the reason for this, and people can, agree or disagree or critique grading or whatever, but I don't feel, especially in the change of the way SGC has approached the gold labels in the last few years, if I was to take that card, crack it out, and with no damage done to it or anything, and resubmit it, I'm not confident it would come back as a gold label. Do I feel it would come back as a gem mint? Yes. Do I feel like it would come back as a gold label pristine? No. And so at that point, I've let some of my gold labels go because of the premium people put on that label. But to me, that lacks significance because it's almost like I just got lucky to get that. And I'm not going to lie, you can go on my channel and go to my first ever SGC reveal video. It is glaringly obvious that there's things that have changed in the way they do the pristines because my first order on 110 cards, I got 13 gold labels. My first time ever using the company.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Makes sense.
I bulk submit now for, several different people, and I hardly ever get gold labels coming back in an order. So they've tightened the reins up on those a lot. So
Sure. So let me touch on a couple other ones. So, if Eric comes back, I think we can get his take on this. But let me ask you a question. So let me ask you a couple of questions, Brandon. They're more rhetorical questions than anything else, but I do want to get your take on this. So let me throw a couple of things at you and let me see what, like I said, we're gonna do some hashtag scholarship. All the things that I'm reading to you guys, by the way, are from the grading company's official websites. Every single one of these, I'm reading it right off their website, all of them. For CGC, I went to their website. For Beckett, I'm on their website. For SGC, I'm on their website. And by the way, I'm going to bring one in. I'm going to have a little fun. I'm going to read you the definition, and then I'm going to tell you at the end who it's from. We're going to have a little fun with this one. All right. So first, I'm going to do Beckett. I'm going to tell you this one right now. So this is for Gem Mint. Again, I'm trying to keep it as apples to apples to the best of my ability. I'm sticking to Gem Mint by their definition. Centering for them is 55-45 both ways on front. You could have said or better. But what's funny, here's the thing. Again, all these companies in their grading standards are not being particular. But 55-45 both ways on front, 60-40 or better on back. That's Beckett's Gem Mint centering. That's what they're considering Gem Mint. And I know we're focusing on centering for this case because that's the key piece that got updated here. But I'm going to read the corners for Beckett for a second, and I want to ask you a question. And this is, by the way, it's more of a rhetorical question. You're welcome to answer at home. So under corners, they put in here for Gem Mint, virtually flawless to the naked eye. What does virtually flawless mean? That's one of those words that doesn't mean anything, but it sort of means something, but it doesn't really mean anything.
Is that things in a manual in space, Eric? Virtually flawless?
Virtually flawless. Virtually flawless. But I'm just saying. So my point, but do you understand why the wording like virtually flawless is open to interpretation? What does virtually flawless mean? It doesn't mean
verbiage is
flawless.
a lot of wordplay.
Yeah, it doesn't mean flawless. It means virtually flawless. And that's not the same thing. Just so we're clear. But let me read you one more. You're going to love this one. Again, Gem Mint. I'm sticking apples to apples. Apples to apples. Gem Mint. Front image centered within a tolerance of 55-45, and back image within 70-30 for sports and 65-35 TCG. Why we're making a distinction for TCG, I have no idea. But 55-45 within a tolerance on the front, and back image within 70-30 for sports. So 70-30, Eric. Not even 60-40. 70-30 tolerance.
So they went more lenient on TCG?
65-35 is actually tighter than sports.
Okay, all right.
But if you notice, that's worse than 60-40 as well. So worse than 60-40 on the back for TCG and 70-30 for sports. That's the back centering.
Is noticeable on the back of TCG cards.
It is.
Like really noticeable.
Now, that last one that I just read you, that I just gave you the centering indicator. What company is that?
I'm going to guess Tag.
The Coaster Makers.
Yeah.
I'm reading it right off their website. This is right off their website right now under the Gem Mint category. That is what it says under centering. I just read it to you verbatim. And that is from the grading rubric, because of course they have to call it something like that. But that's what it is. And it's right here. And for the people watching video, I am going to show you on the screen so that we're all on the same page here. Here it is. The grading rubric for Gem Mint. These are the words right on the screen right now as I speak. So my point, though, nobody is immune. Everybody has the same kind of business in the same category. This is considered the Gem Mint category here. It says right there. There's even the 1 to 1,000 score, the whole thing. By the way, I want to read your corners on this one because, again, we're talking about the verbiage, okay? A card will display 4 sharp corners. Okay, seems reasonable enough. I kind of get that, okay? Showing minor fill or fray artifacts. What does minor mean? Is it like virtually? What does minor mean? Define minor. Anyone? What do you consider to be minor? How minor is minor?
Under 18.
Great. Good job. Very minor surface wear may be visible under high resolution imagery. So not to the naked eye, but under high resolution imagery. Okay. A light but visible corner touch or two may be apparent on the reverse. So not on the front, but on the reverse. Okay. The corners will still be sharp. So didn't we say a card will display 4 sharp corners at the very beginning of this very same definition? But now the corners will be sharp and square. That's the end. And in the middle, a visible corner touch or two may be apparent on the reverse. Eric, I'd be confused.
I'm confused too, because in the centering, they specifically gave standard tolerances for TCG, but then in the corners, which TCG doesn't have sharp square corners, they didn't talk about those.
Indeed. So, look, I'm not here to pick on the coaster makers because Lord knows I'd love to, but that is not my purpose here. My purpose here is not to do that. My point is, vague verbiage is not exclusive to one company, is all I'm getting at.
But you could also use them to answer what Eric's point was and what his argument is of he feels that Gem Mint should be 50-50 centering. And if there was any company out there that should be able to regularly determine whether a card is 50-50 based on what they have told us they use to grade cards, it would be them with the scanning and technology and all of that. And even they're not saying 50-50 is Gem Mint. So
but
the other
can I do one? Can I do you one better? Can I do you one better?
Mm-hmm.
What if I told you that for tag 50-50 centering is not required for pristine?
No, that's stupid.
Scandalous.
Yeah, that's because I know for a fact SGC's is 50-50.
I agree.
I think the term is perfect centering. I think it's perfect 50-50 centering.
I hear what you're saying, but look, again, the robots are very clear on this. The robots have told us, look, centering. This is tag prestige right here.
49.
And back image within 54.5 to 45.5 for sports.
What the hell is that?
Eric, they allow a back centering to almost 55-45 for pristine.
Well,
you could get a
55
1,000 for that.
54.5.
I just,
If-
and again, I'm not looking to pick on any one company.
Well, that's why. By the way, that's why I went through the gamut. I didn't give you one company. I went through a whole bunch of
my initial salty rant. It was saying that all these companies are doing this. I'm well aware of that. It wasn't a bashing of PSA, except I just don't think it was necessary for them to do. I think it's going to cause a problem, with buying and selling these things now. But I've this has been my issue all along, and the jokes that I've made with all the different companies, with their standards, and they're confusing. 4 sharp corners, but they can be fuzzy. Oh, okay. I mean,
I don't think.
and also we won't allow it on the front, but we'll allow it on the back.
That whole back thing, just saying the back can be an absolute shit show. It's like I don't get that at all. That makes no sense to me whatsoever. You can't say a card is gem mint, pristine, gold, fabulous, whatever the hell they come up with, and then say, well, we don't really care about the back of the cup. It doesn't make any sense to me. Never has. All these companies do it. Anytime that I've complained about grading, I have tried to make sure I say the grading industry and not specifically saying this company does it wrong, unless it's Beckett. But that's a whole nother situation. That company is run poorly. Their standards for their grading are the same shit show as everyone else's. The company itself is a complete dumpster fire.
Mm. So the reason why I wanted to make sure that I went through the gamut of them, I did have a lot of fun with the robot one though. The robot one was funny. Come on, like that with pristine, we couldn't even get to 50-50 on pristine. And they got machines.
I have one question though before
Yes.
we get too far along, because
Yes.
this is something that I've thought about. PSA specifically, in their standards, I believe they've always used the 52 mantle as like the example card to try to show things
on their image.
And we've had discussions before about when you read a lot of the standards, they don't really correlate to ultra modern cards with the shininess and the chromium and all of that. And they almost felt antiquated and written towards vintage. Do we think that PSA potentially made this decision because they realized that the bulk of what they're grading is ultra modern, so they could tighten that up, being as we know that vintage cards back in the day, to get one centered period, was kind of surprising out the pack, let alone, to have everything else be in shape to get gem mint moving forward.
Yeah.
Do you think part of it is the amount of the ultra modern stuff, the TCG stuff, because that's now ramped up? And so those 55-45 or the 60-40 level, it might have been okay back in the vintage cardboard days, but these ultra modern shinies and Pokemons and all that other stuff, it needed to be tightened up a little bit.
I think so. Look, I'm not going to try to get in their head, but let me summarize this quickly, and we'll get to the main points just to finish up, because I think we had a little bit of fun with it. But at the end of the day, I still don't think it's the end of the world because of what I'm about to summarize. The reality of it is they're tightening it up, got it to basically on par with a lot of the other examples I gave you. I pretty much, you noticed that a number was coming up over and over again, and they all were within that range of it. That's first. Second, if you go look, even with the modern stuff, the gem rate is not this crazy high number. Plenty of modern cards come out of the pack with defects. Modern. I use the do you remember
and stuff.
Yeah. Do you remember the anniversary edition, like Topps Chrome Anniversary, where they did like the 52 Topps design, etc.? I opened a box of that. Eric, this is a brand new product that came out in like 2021, 2022. It was Topps Anniversary. Nice cards. They got some vintage players and everything in it. Awesome. I would be lucky if I could find a single card that would even hit 60-40. Most of them were like 70-30, 80-20, 90-10 out of the pack, brand new product, chromium, and you can't even hit don't worry, you weren't even close. Like, I can move that tolerance all over to the other side. You were still off center, downright miscut out of the box. So there is quality control issues in modern too.
I was disappointed. Oh, go ahead, Eric.
Shouldn't be, and there shouldn't be quality control issues in modern. The reason I've been over this 1,000 times, I'll make it quick. The reason there was no quality control in vintage is because the cards weren't what they were selling. They were selling gum.
Mm-hmm.
The cards were a bonus. They didn't give a care what condition they were in. They were just a bonus. Now, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry, especially after the pandemic. You should
they still don't care.
You should care. And they still don't. And it blows my mind. And I think it comes down to they're not printing these things in-house with people paying attention and people who care and people that are in charge and people who are writing the checks, standing there and making sure the stuff is done right. They're shipping it all over the world for the cheapest, to the cheapest printing shop they can find. And they're just running the stuff through and shipping it back. And then they go, well, we got a deadline. We got to ship it out. Doesn't matter if they're all miscut, printed backwards, upside down, sideways. Get them out.
I look forward to the day that they go back in house and the amount of defects stays the same. Maybe it gets worse. It's like, well, we pay them more. That should fix it, right?
We'd have more to complain about because that would be unacceptable.
So real quick, I want to summarize. I'll get to it with you, Brandon, in 1 second. I just want to quickly make that one point I wanted to touch on. So the reason I brought up the coins, twofold, and I'll be quick. Number one was the whole thing about looking at the old holders and people looking at that. In coins, that happened a long time ago because remember, in coins, grading basically started in the 80s. They actually predate the sports card grading thing. Some of the biggest one, like PCGS, started like in 1985, 86. So they were ahead of that by like 5 or 6 years. So a lot of the issues that we're talking about, they had a decade ago or longer. So the point that even the Mike Baker authentication thing, like that stuff has already been done for well over a decade in coins. And there were a lot of very expensive coins. But the point is that people would go out of their way to look for the old PCGS holders because they actually graded harder back in the day. So they would intentionally seek those out to crack them out and regrade them because they were more lenient. And then the pendulum will swing and then the pendulum will swing back. So the whole arbitrage with old and new holders, that stuff goes on. One other quick point I wanted to make. Imagine the trouble we're having, Brandon, with this and the vague standards and everything. I've shown it a couple times, but I'll be quick. This is the ANA, the American Numismatic Association. This is the grading standards of United States coins. It's focused just on United States coins. That is the grading standards on United States coins. And imagine in sports cards, we struggle with, trust me, we struggle with a much more basic version of it. This one goes down to the coin type, different series, and different things to look out for in the different series of different kind of conditions. This is what to look out for, et cetera, et cetera. This thing is like 300 pages of standards and different types to look at. And they have to figure that out. And we can't figure out sports cards because it's too complex. But the reality, though, is it is complex because, and that'll be a subject of a video I'm going to make, grading is never objective. It never will be objective. And actually, it shouldn't be. But that'll be a topic for a video separately, which I'll explain it later on. But just for context, y'all are complaining about the grading and the grading standards. Imagine if this was your grading standards.
Well, you mentioned the old school, like the arbitrage of the old holders.
Yes.
There's somebody that's well known. You don't hear him spoken of a lot anymore. But he's well known in YouTube and he grades a absolute crap ton. But Nolan, Elite
Is that Elite Co? Yeah, Elite Co 3. Yeah.
He admitted that used to be his arbitrage was buying the old Beckett holders.
Yep.
He would buy the early Beckett cert numbers, crack them out because he knew they graded Beckett tougher. He actually was shocked because he bought a Peyton Manning refractor off of me in an old Beckett holder. And when he cracked it, he was surprised because he was like, man, they actually overgraded this one. So, but he was one that was well known for doing that, buying old Beckett holders, cracking them out, sending them to PSA. But anyway, the other thing that I just wanted to say, I was disappointed because I was surprised that nobody took the opportunity of these changes. And if you really look at the the new PSA verbiage and the SGC verbiage for Gem Mint, they're basically the same thing, just words twisted a little bit different order.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I was surprised nobody just for shits and giggles did the rumor that PSA did this so they could just easily transfer over SGC's graders, because
That's
that
literally what we were
the
hoping.
best.
That's what do I follow Bobbles and Ball cards for if not rumor mongering? Eric, like he's talking about something that like is literally his job.
It
Sounds to
the
me
greatest thing. It's like, yeah, y'all said they're gonna merge for the longest time. This is just for an easy transition.
Eric,
like
could
as
you
soon as
imagine
I seen it and how it was all worded and how it was like the same thing but just in different order, I was like, this would be fun.
Eric, could you imagine if I had a whole segment on this podcast where I talked about and I tried to outsource being a jerk towards the coaster makers, and you like stare at me, go like, but that's what you do. That's what you were put on this earth to do. And I'm like, you're right, Eric. What was I thinking? This is what I was put on this earth to do. Scandalous. But anyway, so bottom line, look, we're all going to have difference of opinion on this, but the reason I wanted to give you all those different versions was so that you could see that vague verbiage is kind of the standard of the day. There is latitude. That's intentional. And I will do a separate video where I'll talk about this in a little bit more depth. It's going to take a little time. I can record it in one shot, but the reality is it's going to take a little more explanation. I don't want to use this venue because I want to make sure I go through it. I'll actually show you some examples. I'll actually make my point. And again, you can totally disagree with me, but I'll give you a rationale for why it's that way and why, honestly, in my opinion, it should actually has to be that way because it's more art than science. There's elements of it that you can make science, but some of it, I would never want the machine to do it because as soon as you do that, you're basically offering the opportunity to be consistently wrong, which is not very helpful. And also there are people who take advantage of the discrepancies of it, but I'll get into more of that in a future video. So there you go. Future video upcoming here. I'll work on it and I'll get that set up. Otherwise, okay. Anybody got any last words on this one? And then we can, or otherwise we can wind her down.
No,
I've said my piece.
Sounds good. If you've got opinions on this, feel free. Like I said, you can totally disagree with us, completely fine. If you want to disagree with Eric, feel free to do it twice, just to make sure. Make sure you copy and paste it and paste both into the comment section so we totally get it. Otherwise, remember to hit the like button. And by the way, we're all caught up on the audio version. Brandon, I got them all uploaded. We're all caught up. We are now up to date on the audio version. So hopefully I'll get this one this week. Cross our fingers. We'll see what we can do. But regardless, we managed it. So more videos coming up on the channel. Friday live streams at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time this week. Upcoming will be a normal episode. And hopefully, because I'm going to go to the card show, by the time we record this next episode for the podcast, I'll be able to report back my findings from the card show. I'll probably just be fresh back from it because it'll be earlier in the day that we finish that up. But we'll see how it goes. Again, scheduling, we'll figure it all out. But hopefully, we've got some stuff for you. Otherwise, feel free to give any comments or thoughts. If you got any other topics you want us to touch on, certainly can, but let us know and give us that feedback. Also vote for the silly card of the week. I will get the community post put up, and we've got some interesting candidates, a lot of interesting faces. Remember to fear that man. Fear him. Just saying. So for Brandon Bubbles and Ball Cards, known associated 540 Flips, and Eric Sanderson d'Or, a man who remains salty at all times. The mines are going full time on salt. He is here. If you got your complaints, send them to Sanderson d'Or on Instagram. All the complaints. Other than that, we'll leave it to that one. Episode 115. Thank you to Brett Favre and the goat of goats, Siggy Palfy, who was robbed. Scandalous. We'll catch you in the next one.